God of grace and God of all creation, we gather with you in our midst and thank you for the variety and diversity of the world and for people who want to study different religious traditions and for the tradition that we live in. Grant us a goodly measure of patience and peace as we move through these days. Amen. We talked on December 3rd about some approaches to how we do this and about the concept of crossing over. And today we're going to dive into two very old, complex religious traditions that I'm going to say all of us, me included, know a little about. And I know a little more because of living in India and Thailand. And secondly, because I taught history of the world religions over 25 times in the last 10 years. And each time I changed the course because of the makeup of the class and because of continuing learnings that I had from questions from students. Now, I'm going to do this because I think it'll work this way, because this will set a tone. Tell me when that's kind of framed. Is that?
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Okay. That was, let me think. Fall of 1966. Who can do the math? How many years ago is that? 76?
24, 44.
50.
54. Yeah. That was a 20-year-old Peace Corps volunteer in Indian clothes. And I didn't wear them all the time because I worked in agriculture, trying to teach people how to raise chickens scientifically instead of letting them run wild. I wore baggy cotton Indian pants and t-shirts because I was digging and planting and building a lot in my job. But the reason I showed you that picture is that it helps if you understand the literal journey that I had. One of the amazing things that happened when I ended up in a tribal village of 90 people was that a Lutheran missionary from Germany, you have to love missionaries just because of their dedication and their craziness, went there to study anthropology because the village was surrounded by tribal people who lived in straw huts and wore different clothing. And he wrote a monograph called The Rajgones of Adilabad, the high-ranking tribal people of this district. He also planted a church there. The church was no longer in use because they had no Christians in the village. And it had an old pump organ. My roommate, who was of Scandinavian descent and another Lutheran from North Dakota, and I did our best to get the pump organ going just so we could play with it. But alas, the church was abandoned. But it was a very striking experience for a young person of 20 that began with getting off the plane in New Delhi, which is like any capital city in a faraway part of the world, overwhelming, and then to end up in this tiny tribal village. So we're going to begin with Hinduism because I went to India first and because it's older than Buddhism. It is the name Hindu for the person and the name Hinduism really are European constructs, and it comes from the Indus Valley where the earliest civilizations existed in India. And for a long, long time, the scholarship really maintained that Aryans, and when that word is used in anthropology, history, or comparative religions, it means light-skinned people, not our modern connotation of skinheads or Aryan supremacy. So the scholarship for a century or more said that Aryans came through the Khyber Pass from the Middle East, and I'm going to use air quotes, which I don't do very often, brought their culture and the natives of the Indian subcontinent, changed some of it to create Hinduism. Not true. And the reason it's not true is that archaeologists in the middle to early part of the 20th century, more the middle, excavated along the banks of the Indus River, had to dig deeply, literally, and found an ancient civilization named Harappa. And they had temples there. So the decision is not final, but the tendency in scholarship is to lean towards the fact that Hinduism developed from the people who lived on the Indian subcontinent. And the rest of it is mystery. But it was not an import that was modified. It was indigenous, if you will. So it has about 1 billion followers worldwide. And it is really more appropriate to speak of Hinduisms because the religious tradition is organic, it changes, and it's pluralistic as their society is, so that what one group of Hindus does, or devotees of one particular god or goddess, will be slightly or significantly different from another part of the country.
You thirsty? Egg?
Me? I heard somebody ask if somebody.
Oh, sorry. That's me. I asked my dog.
That's
You
okay.
need to mute.
Yep. I
Anyway,
don't have. Yeah.
there are simply several strands of Hinduism. Think of it as being braided together, but each braid has some distinctive features. And if it's hard for some of us to get our minds around that, think about how many different Christian traditions there are. The Book of Denominations that is updated every year has over 250 in the United States alone. And then we add the Orthodox traditions, which are multiplicative, not just Greek Orthodox and not just Eastern Orthodox. It goes much beyond that. And you've got probably 400 different varieties of Christianity. That's for the purposes of comparison. So the other thing that I wanted to add is a repetition of what I said from one of my mentors, Bob Worley from McCormick Theological Seminary, that all theology is contextual. And it is simply impossible to understand Hinduism, and you'll hear this when I get a little further on in the presentation. It's impossible to separate religion and politics. And I know that's a thorny issue, but it exists in our religious tradition historically from the time of the Roman Empire, and it exists today in the fact that politics and religion, as much as we like to talk about separation of church and state, are intertwined. If you separate one, you miss part of the story. So the main practice of, well, let me begin with Hindu doctrine. The Vedas are the sacred texts, and there are more than 10 of them. And the word in Sanskrit means knowledge. It's the oldest extant text in Sanskrit and Pali two of the ancient religious languages of India. And it was recorded and passed on by the Brahmins, who are the highest of the caste system. And I'll explain that later. So the Brahmins had the knowledge to read texts and knew Sanskrit and Pali, and they passed on these religious documents. The main teachings there are dharma, karma, moksha, or samsara, and moksha. And I'm going to try to dispel a few commonly misunderstood notions, because I heard them from students all the time. And I'll begin with dharma, which loosely translated means your obligation that you incur when you are born into your family and that stays with you throughout your life. It is your duty to be the best possible family member, clan member, caste member, member of a community locally and nationally and in the whole world, to be a good Hindu. Now, anyone want to throw out a definition of karma? Do you know the commonly heard one? It's okay.
Your fate.
Pardon? Fate?
Fate.
Okay. Anyone else?
What goes around comes around.
I know that voice. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And that implies an absolute connection between good behavior resulting in good things in our lives and bad behavior resulting in bad things. Now, nobody else has to say anything, and you don't have to raise hands. Don't raise hands, in fact. How many of us have done bad things? Don't raise your hand. Okay, I did it for all of us. Have I been punished by a Hindu god or a holy man or a Buddhist monk for the bad things I've done? I don't think so. Not in my understanding of God. Have there been consequences for the bad things that I've done? Yes, absolutely. So karma, instead of that punishment, action punishment linking, really says that everything that we say and do has results in the world. And the best image I can think of it is a ripple effect. When we were all kids and we'd go down to the creek or a pond and throw a pebble or a larger rock, it hits and then ripples happen for a while and then they dissipate. I think it's a good image for karma without the dissipation. The ripples continue. Samsara is the Sanskrit word for the endless cycle of reincarnation. So Hindus believe that, not in a resurrection as Christians do, but they believe that we are reincarnated. And it's a thorny argument to try to explain why some people are reincarnated at higher levels of existence than others. It's something that I have never been able to master. And a fellow teaching colleague who was Hindu told me that she would have to spend maybe 10 hours explaining it to me. And it was simply beyond me. But Hindus believe, my lack of knowledge notwithstanding, that we are reincarnated repeatedly until we gain enough knowledge and correction of our past activities that we achieve moksha, which is not the same as Buddhist nirvana, and I'll make that distinction later. but its release from this constant cycle of being reincarnated and having an eternal life without flaws. And I don't want to equate that to heaven. That's why I used the language eternal life without flaws. Now, there's a tension in Hinduism between the teachings of the religion and the individual's bonds to family and society and the particular divinities that occur in a given area. One of the most difficult questions to answer about Hinduism is, why are there so many gods? The answer is that it's a huge subcontinent. It was largely isolated until the 19th century. So with the huge population, people took the main gods and goddesses that they learned about and created local regional gods and goddesses. And they literally can change from village to village. And it is pluralistic. There's just no getting away from that. Now, the caste system needs a little explanation. Gandhi worked very effectively to try to get rid of it, and it is outlawed in India. And I'm going to make a comparison here. Brown versus Board of Education opened the school system so that there weren't separate systems for white people and people of color. 1954. I was 8 years old. Do we have equality in education in our country yet? I see a couple of people shaking their head no, and I shook my head no. Not really. Things are much better than they were, but if you go back and look at those videos, and I remember it from the early days of television, National Guard troops were escorting Black children into school. And at the University of Alabama, 3 hours from where I taught at Auburn, Governor George Wallace stood with state troopers and said, no Negroes coming into my university. And Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General, and he sent some troops down there, and 2 students were admitted in my lifetime. So it's easy to pick on the caste system, and it has changed for the better in India because of Gandhi's work. But there are 4 particular castes. The Brahmins are the priests, the Kshatriyas are the warriors and the nobles. We would call them the military elite, not the foot soldiers, but the officers. And who would we call nobility in our society? I'd venture to say we don't have nobility in this country, but they're the rich people, the really rich people, the 2%. And then the Vaishyas are the commoners. That's us. Not that we are common and ordinary, but if somebody is really in that 2%, please talk to me, because I still have places I want to travel to that I can't afford. I'll pay you back. And then lastly, the Shudras, or servants. And within that caste are subcastes, including the untouchables. And Gandhi named them Harijan, which translates as children of God. And that's how he regarded them. And the structured Indian society, the upper classes, did not like that the untouchables were regarded as children of God by Gandhi, but it changed a lot of thinking. Arranged marriages are increasingly less common in India, but that's part of the family order. Now, the main religious duty of a Hindu is to perform puja. And that is a particular offering of things that appeal to the five senses. You can do it at home. You can do it at a temple. You can do it alone. You can do it in a group. And puja involves flowers because of the beauty of them and the smell of some flowers. It involves food because of the taste and the smell. And it involves chanting sacred texts, and usually short ones that are easy to remember, because that appeals to the ears, and that covers the senses. And the food offering and the flowers are put out in front of the home or at a small temple near the house, or on festival days, everyone goes to the temple and brings offerings. And the chanting is done at home or locally, singly, or in small groups. And in the temple, it's led by a Brahmin priest. And the most common one, and it has great significance for me because let me put it this way. When I'm either going into an MRI machine in the tunnel, I'm not claustrophobic, but none of us really looks forward to that time with all the noisy clanging of the magnets. So I either chant, and I'll show you the position with your thumb and finger together, and I will simply chant Om Shanti Om, Om Shanti Om. Or for Mr. Denny, I will recite one of the Psalms in Hebrew, and this is in the middle of the Psalm, Steve. Lev tahor baradli Elohim v'ruach nachon charesh bekirbi al tash lekeni melifeneka v'ruach kodshecha al tikach memeni hashiva li. And it's one that some of you may know. Create me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. And it somehow resonates more for me because I memorized it in Hebrew. And either one of those traditions bring me peace. When we switch to Buddhism, I'll show you another thing that I do that brings me peace in times of stress. And responsive prayer does as well. And I have a lot of that memorized from pastoring. So I will just recite some of the liturgy. In peace, let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. For the peace of the whole world, for the well-being of the Church of God, and for the unity of all, let us pray to the world. Lord, have mercy. And these are things that connect me from different traditions. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is violence in Hinduism. And I'm looking at the clock, and I'll have to get that in quickly and then talk about Buddhism. The violence began with the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, conquering a lot of India. So India has a significant Islamic population in the south, and in the area west of Delhi, because of Shah Jahan, who became the major emperor who did a lot of building in India, including the Taj Mahal. Has anyone seen pictures of it? Has anyone been there besides me? I'm speaking to my wife, so don't listen. You get to go if you pick that as the next trip, dear. It's your choice. It was built by him, well, by about 12,000 workers. And it was built as a tomb for his wife. It's not a religious monument. And the minarets at the four corners are designed to fall outward in case of an earthquake. And the tomb is below ground, and her sarcophagus is actually below an empty one, just for purposes of safety. And with your shoes off, you can actually walk down marble stairs and see the empty sarcophagus. It's an absolutely exquisite building. And just a little quick footnote, I was arrested there. Not at the Taj, but I went at dawn to take pictures with an old 35mm Konica. And it was on a trip to India, and my former wife and 2 children were asleep. And when I left the Taj, I went behind it where there's a bridge across the River Jumna, and there were little short British boxcars and steam engines. So I saw a sign in Hindi and English that said, "No photography permitted." I looked around, I didn't see anybody, so I shot a couple rolls of film. I'm rewinding the second roll of film, and there's a little tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and here's an Indian policeman in knee socks and Bermuda shorts and epaulets on his shoulder, and this big bamboo stick, like a billy club, only bamboo. And he points to the sign, and I said, I don't read Hindi. And then he points to the other side of the bridge and says, "English." And I said, "Oh, I didn't see that one." And he took my camera, and I said, please, no, don't open it." Then he gestured for me to follow him, and he took me to the police station. Somebody in the police station spoke a lot of English, and I explained that I was not a Pakistani spy, that I had no involvement in the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947, and that I came from a family of railroad men, and I just was taking pictures. He nodded, and then he spoke Punjabi, which I didn't know, never learned, to the policeman, and the policeman took me home on his bicycle for breakfast. I tell you, you can't write adventures like that. Violence began in the Mughal Empire, and it progressed. Sikhism, which we'll cover in January, was started in the 16th century by a guru. Oversimplified, it attempted to pull together the best features of Hinduism and Islam. And the Sikhs are the gentlemen with the turbans and the beards and a silver bracelet, signs that they have as part of their faith. And there has been a lot of mistrust for a variety of complex reasons. And Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister, was murdered by her Sikh bodyguards, who were very loyal and faithful to her, because she approved a military action to get separatists out of the Sikh temple, the holiest place in their religion in Northwest India. She sent a bunch of troops in with help from the Israeli and American government in terms of intelligence and strategies. And there was a massacre of people who were illegally occupying the temple. They were called terrorists by the Indian government. And it was just a horrible event in their history. Where is Hinduism today? Largely still in India, where 80% of the people are Hindu, but with a significant population in the United States and Canada because of immigration. And 3 of the doctors, actually, if I count my time in inpatient rehab, 5 of the doctors who were my primary care physicians when I was hospitalized were of Indian ancestry, and most of them first or second generation Americans. And any of us who have been around healthcare know the number of foreign people. It was even on the news today on Jake Tapper's program that foreign people have been involved with the overseeing or central involvement in the production of vaccines. So let's keep going. I have about 15 minutes on Buddhism, and then I'll take some questions. Buddhism, regardless of what you might read, is not an offshoot of Hinduism. It is a separate religion with some natural overlapping because of geography. The name of the Buddha, and I say it that way because that's how Buddhists pronounce it, not to
Jenny?
go off, but I always try to be respectful of other traditions when teaching this course in college. His name was Siddhartha, and he was a prince. Those of us who are over 60 might have read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha in college. It's a coming of age story, loosely modeled on the life of the Buddha, but not about Buddhism. And he was born into a royal family somewhere at the very end of Nepal and the beginning of India on the border there. There wasn't a border at the time of his birth. And he was born about 2,500 years ago and 566 BC. And the wise men predicted that he would become a Buddha. And this is the same practice that obtains in Tibetan Buddhism, where selected monks will recognize a child as the next Buddha shortly after birth in almost all cases. So the king was not happy that his son was going to become the Buddha because he wanted him to be a ruler upon the king's death. So he told his wife, I will make life so good in this palace that he will never want to leave. As was the practice, he married a beautiful princess at an early age of 16. And then the king built them 3 palaces, one for each season. There are not 4 seasons in that part of the world, no winter. And he became disillusioned with life inside of the palace and wanted to see what's going on outside. So he made 4 trips. And on the first 3, he saw sickness, ill people, like going through the ICU. He saw old age, like visiting a long-term care facility or working in one. And he saw a dead person. And he asked himself the big question that many of us have, in other words, perhaps, asked, how can I enjoy this pleasant life I have when there's so much suffering in the world? And that's one of the core principles of Buddhism, that all life is suffering. He went out on a 4th time and he saw a wandering ascetic monk. Think of the early desert fathers and mothers, because women did it in Christianity, who Simeon Stylites in the 3rd or 4th century sat on a platform on a pole for 40 years in the desert. I just have innumerable questions about that and about him, but that's asceticism pushed to the extreme. And Buddha did just that. He renounced all of his wealth. He shaved his head, called himself Gautama. He got hand-me-down robes and wandered from place to place, listening to wise teachers. And he did this for 6 years, and none of that really worked for him. And he felt that the princely life was overdoing things and the ascetic life was. So he began to eat food again and nourished himself a bit. And then on a full moon day in May, he went and sat under a tree in deep meditation. It's called a Bodhi tree. That's its agronomical, if that's a word, name. It's a kind of a fig tree. And he meditated. And he said, I'm not going to leave until I find an answer to this question about suffering. And he had a number of temptations while he was meditating. Does this sound familiar? Then he saw bolts of lightning and wind and heavy rain. And then he sent demonic armies with weapons, and one by one, Gautama met these armies and defeated them with his virtue. And finally, he realized the cause of suffering and how to remove it. And at this point, he became the Buddha, which literally translates as the awakened one. And for 45 years, he spread his teachings. And in Hinduism, Dharma is your obligation to live a good life. In Buddhism, Dharma is the whole body of knowledge that are the teachings of the Buddha. He encouraged everybody, much like what we in the West call the Golden Rule, to have compassion for each other and to develop their own virtue. He says, you should do your own work because I can only teach the way. He never displayed anger. He was never impatient, never spoke harshly, even to those who ridiculed him. And he taught in a way that people could readily understand, so that his followers felt that he was speaking directly to him. And this is the way that I sometimes feel when I'm reading I don't have a red letter edition of the Bible, but my study Bible is so marked up. There's maybe 10 or 15% of the pages is my ink and underlining in the margins. Many times, especially the parables of Jesus, as puzzling as they are so inviting to wrestle with that I feel like, it's just for me, and I know it's not. Okay. And then he also said, whoever serves the sick and suffering serves me. He knew that there were other Buddhas before him and there would be others after him. And a word derived from that belief called bodhisattvas. And they are people who have found the Bodhi tree, but they have chosen not to become fully enlightened because they have work here to do on earth. So I don't want to make it hierarchical. I know people whom I admire that have a much more constant, solid, and deeper faith than I do. I'm speaking very personally here because they are my go-to people when I'm having doubts or when I feel like I'm falling short. And I don't know if I mentioned to you in the first class, but when students would say to me, what religion are you? They meant what? I told you this, didn't I? Yeah, and if we got to Christian, they would say, well, what kind of Christian are you? And I would say, a lousy one, because it's really hard to follow Jesus all the time. I know the teachings and I really should do this more than I do, but I'm a lousy one. And there you are. Now, the two main goals of Buddhism are to know ourselves and then see how we can take our shortcomings and benefit by the teachings of the Buddha. And I'm going to give you some very simple precepts. Nothing is ever lost in the universe. So everything in the natural world returns in one way or another. The second is that everything changes. And this is modern science and physics. We have no dinosaurs anymore, but when the dinosaurs died out, that wasn't the end of life. Change comes about because of the law of cause and effect, and that's in science textbooks as well. But here, it's under the rubric of karma. Nothing ever happens to us unless it's deserved. Now, that doesn't mean that being good means that your life will be good. It means me for me, with a Christian understanding of Buddhism, or my Christian overlay, if you will, that I have the promise of eternal life. So whatever happens in this life is in part cause and effect, but it's not the end of the story. And it's not a simple question of good deeds, good results, bad deeds, bad results, but it's that there is a cause and effect. And the future is the key to how that's going to happen. So we really shouldn't fear karma. We should be motivated by it. And I'm going to quote directly from one of the Buddha's teachings. The kind of seed sown will produce that kind of fruit. Those who do good will reap good results. Those who do evil will reap evil results. If you carefully plant a good seed, you will joyfully gather good fruit. And I could make a ready comparison with the passage from Scripture about the wheat and the chaff. What happens with the chaff? Yeesh, burned in the fire. Not a pleasant image. Okay, 4 noble truths. There is suffering. Suffering is common to all. We are the cause of our suffering. Usually it has to do with ego. We want something, we're impatient. We lose sight of goodness and find something that is less than good that's attractive. The suffering that we endure, the simple answer is that we can stop it by stopping what causes suffering. And that's a tough one if it means setting aside the ego. And if everyone can become enlightened, then suffering will end. And that is a big prospect. I'll talk about it when I wrap up. We all suffer from these things. When we're born, we cry because we've left a comfortable, protected place. And even if we were born in the back of a taxi, it's still not the same as being in the womb. And if we were born in a delivery room, there's bright lights and it's not warm and suddenly we're not protected anymore and we cry. When we're sick, we're miserable. And I'm going to make a sexist statement here in favor of women because men generally deal with sickness far less graciously than women do. Women are smiling, some of you. I think it's largely true. And old age, these are things that the Buddha saw when he was Prince Gautama, Prince Siddhartha. When old, we have aches and pains and find it hard to get around. Yep, the body starts to decline. And none of us wants to die. I was very happy when I woke up and was told that I was going to make a complete recovery. And I thought, wow, I've got more time. This is very good news. And I really was. And we feel deep sorrow when someone else dies because we're lost from them. We don't have them now anymore. And we miss them. But there's a promise in Hinduism and Buddhism and Christianity that we aren't, it's not the end of the story. And some other things we suffer from: being around people we don't like, being separated from people we love. Here's the big ego one: not getting what we want. And then everyday problems and disappointments, which are unavoidable. And the Buddha never said that there was not happiness in life, but he said that it was ephemeral. Eventually, we're going to meet with some kind of suffering. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that good Buddhists follow the Eightfold Path. The first is right view. And that means seeing the whole world through the eyes of the Buddha's teachings. And imagine if I could take Allison Lundeen, our parish associate, her training and teaching on visualizing Jesus. Imagine if I or all of us could see the world through the eyes of Jesus instead of our own eyes. Would that make a profoundly radical difference? You betcha. So, right thought. We are what we think. So, if one of my children says something angrily to me, I have to stay with right thought and clear thought and just brush aside what I perceive as anger on their part and be a loving parent. Right speech. This is for Mr. Denny and his knowledge of Hebrew, which is much greater than mine. The Hebrew word davar means both word, as in spoken word, and it also means deed. So if you say it, it's the same as doing it. So I'm going to not be silly here. And that when I learned this in Hebrew in 1994, I quit saying things like, and I'll just say it to Steve, the rest of you can plug your ears. Hey, Steve, go to hell.
Okay.
If you believe the dual meaning of the word in Hebrew, I just consigned him to hell. Now, I don't have the power or authority to do it, but if I'm mad at you and I say go to hell, it's going to hurt your feelings, my friend, right?
Right.
Yeah. Have we ever hurt each other's feelings, you and me? One little time. Yeah, one little time. And we went to right thought and right speech to correct it.
Words have power.
Words have power, exactly. And right conduct, because it always behooves us to remember that somebody else might be seeing what you're doing. Okay? And if somebody else doesn't see you, there's somebody you believe in who knows about what you're doing. And right livelihood. Choose a job that gives you satisfaction and that helps others. And every job has a component where you can help others. Through an odd set of circumstances, I ended up being a locomotive engineer midway between Des Moines and Kansas City, running freight trains in both directions. Was that a right livelihood? If I did my job correctly and everybody was safe, if I was kind and good to everybody I met, if I didn't look down on my nose at the rural farmers in the county who worked as engineers and brakemen who rode with me, if I treated them with respect and respected their skills, if I didn't get off of my run in Kansas City and walk down to the sleazy district of Armourdale and sit in the bar and get drunk, I was displaying right livelihood. Does that make sense? I don't want to elevate one profession over another. Right effort means doing our best at all times and having goodwill towards others. And that's another hard one. Right mindfulness comes back to thought, word, and deeds. If we are truly mindful, we will have healthy and productive thoughts, words, and deeds. And then right concentration. And this is a very Asian phenomenon. We in the West tend to jump from one thing to another. And I'll give you one example. I had a year of spiritual training with a Lutheran pastor. At the time, I was living in Hyde Park, doing internship in Midlothian, Illinois, and he was up on the north side in Rogers Park. And in one of our meetings, I had to meet him at 5:30 in the morning. That was the only time that he had available. And then I could get down to internship. We met for an hour and a half. And one time when Pastor Carl McKenzie, I just rapped on the side door to the church office. He opened the door, and when he saw me, he went like this. So I just didn't say anything. He gestured. I followed him. We went into an empty room, and there was about a knee-high table with a big pillar candle in the center of the room and 2 cushions to sit on. He sat down. He gestured for me to sit down. He lit the candle, and then he pointed towards my eyes and the candle. And we sat for an hour and a half. And I knew he wanted me to meditate. I didn't know much about meditation, but I cleared my mind. And other things came in, I kept pushing them away. It took me about half an hour to even get close to emptying my mind. I have no idea how he knew the time was up. I don't think he was counting. He didn't have a watch. He didn't look. There was no clock in the room. He leaned over and blew the candle out, stood up, held out his arms. We hugged, and he pointed toward the door, and I walked out. That morning, when I was a seminary student, an intern with a Lutheran pastor, I thought, I need to learn something about this meditation stuff. And Jackie and I have gone to full moon meditation. That's when the Buddha had his awakening and became the enlightened one. It started on a full moon day, the whole process of his waiting. And it's a very special time in Buddhist worship. And we have found that with a good teacher on 2 huge flat panels in a former Presbyterian church, now a Buddhist meditation center. I know the pastor who used to pastor in Norwood Park. And we get in, I don't, it sounds too casual. We meditate, and we meditate deeply, and something very powerful about that. Okay, I'm at 12:15, so I'm going to stop. I'm sorry that I didn't digress, but there's more to say about Buddhism, and I'll try to encapsulate it and send it to everybody who's here today. Do you have questions? I'll stay for as long as you want, or you please feel free to leave, but I'll try to answer your questions.
Well, a question I have is, you said that in Hinduism, when people are reincarnated, they have a higher level. Does that mean a higher caste, or what do you mean by higher level?
Well, the cultural belief is that you can be reincarnated as an animal. Okay.
Mhm.
And the historical aspect of the caste system says you start at the bottom, and then further reincarnation, you work your way up. But work your way up is the right, you can't work at it, it happens. Okay, so your premise is right, but it's more historical and cultural than it is a strict religious teaching of Hinduism.
So you reincarnate as a person who's just more aware? I don't know. I don't understand.
In the process of waiting to be reincarnated again, you increase your knowledge and your practice. I can't explain it more clearly. It's like another chance at it.
Terry, is there someone existing today who is carrying the title and function of the Buddha?
No. What has happened there is that Buddhism developed into 2 major sects. The great Mahayana is the great vehicle, and Theravada is the great teachings. One emphasizes practice, the other emphasizes teaching and learning. Thailand is exclusively Theravada Buddhism. And as Buddhism moved and spread to Korea, Japan, China, Indonesia, it developed in much the way different denominations. So there are currently the meditation center in Chicago, which has 2 locations on the north side, Norwood Park and near Jefferson Park, Ellen Metro Station. They are the largest statistical group of Buddhists in Thailand, but they have a leader from the late 19th, early 20th century. So there is no Buddha.
So
Different-
Terry,
Different denominations. Yeah, I'm sorry, Chuck.
so 2 things. One, you seem to have an incredible interest in the different religions, and curious about where you think the genesis of that was. And second, you seem interested in bringing some of the practices from these different religions to your Christianity. Talk more about that.
Okay. I think the origins of my interest go from childhood, which I mentioned on December 3rd, that I grew up a minority Protestant with a few other Protestant Scandinavians and Germans in an all-Italian neighborhood. So I was curious about Roman Catholicism. And then I can't emphasize enough how much going to India opened my mind and broadened my horizons, because I thought 1776 was really ancient history. And then next thing I know, I'm walking around the Red Fort, which Shah Jahan built in the 1600s. And then I'm seeing, temples that are ruins of temples that are BCE. So it was just a natural curiosity. And as far as bringing things to Christianity, I think I would change those words to say, I seek out spirituality and want to appropriate it as part of the richness of my package. I don't have a word. I'm groping for a word for package, but here, I'll demonstrate. This was a gift from some. Can you see? Yes. It's a Tibetan Buddhist prayer bowl. You ready? I don't know how long it took, and that was a very simple, rough wave of the wood in the brass. But that simple exercise can lower my blood pressure, allow me to focus when I'm scattered, bring me a sense of peace. So have I brought that into Christianity? Into mine, but my Christianity is kind of separate. This is an adjunct, if that makes it easier to understand. I would not do this as a pastor leading worship. I would not sit in the back of a church and make noise with my prayer bowl. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I just know that within the Catholic Church, I know Steve Denny's been involved in centering prayer
Mm-hmm.
and some of that stuff. And we don't have as much consciousness of some of those traditions as, like you say, Buddhism.
Yeah. Joy?
I have a related question. To what extent can an atheist be a Buddhist? Like and related to that, you said that you had Buddhist friends who have a deeper faith than yours. And I guess the question in my mind is, do they have, like, what do they have a faith in? Is there any supernatural or necessarily?
Well, okay. I think I understand where your question came from, and correct me if I'm wrong. An atheist, a common definition would be someone with no faith. Literally, etymologically, a plus theos from Greek, without God. And the theos probably should be a small God there, not a capital G Christian God. So could an atheist be a Buddhist? No, because they would have to believe in the teachings of the Buddha. But the Buddha is not a God. The Buddha was a human being who died and never came back. So I haven't fully answered your question. Do you want to try, give me another one, or?
Okay, well, like, to what extent is it just a philosophy as opposed to, I mean, it seems like it doesn't necessarily have supernatural commitments. Is that true?
It doesn't have, I didn't hear the last part.
Supernatural commitments.
The commitment in Buddhism can be immense. There's a community of 15 people. There are 6 monks and 9 lay people, 15 minutes from our home, who have been sent here and chosen to come here. And they are devoting their life to teaching meditation. Not wishing.
Right,
So, and
is the commitment to some kind of supernatural something?
I think Buddhists, and I will have to ask them, I think they would say that the process of the Buddha coming to enlightenment is supernatural. It doesn't happen for everybody. For them, that's supernatural. For us, it's a historical fact.
Terry,
Nancy,
do the Buddhists believe there is a God?
in the sense of a Christian God?
The sense of a creator, someone who created the world, at that at least, as a minimum.
Not as a doctrine in anything that I've read, but it's inherent in the Buddha's teachings that everything changes and everything in the world not has a creator, but came into existence for a purpose.
But not with a being that created it and has a relationship with humans in any way.
I'd have to parse that more closely because I haven't read all the texts, and I'll ask for an answer from one of my monk friends. But I think, yes, with the relationship with the teaching of the Buddha, but not without a God who has a relationship with people.
So do the Buddhist writings, what the Buddha wrote, does he refer to God or just to practices?
Not the concept of God does not exist in Buddhism, so no.
Okay. Oh, that answered my question.
There's not.
What about Hinduism? They have lots of gods.
Yeah. So
they do believe in the supernatural.
Well, supernatural is kind of an unusual word for me to work with.
In spiritual beings out as separate from human beings.
Oh, okay. Thanks. No, that would not obtain in his Hinduism, but they believe in the historical reality of many gods and goddesses.
Well, historical meaning they lived as people or they lived as spirits?
As spirits, but not in the same way that Christianity regards the spiritual.
And do they believe they still live?
They are worshipped as deities, and I'm not sure. So
So both of the religions focus on the practice,
yes,
but they all would believe that the future afterlife relates to how well they did the practice during life.
that's oversimplifying. I'm not.
I'm trying to get it as simple as I can,
No,
so I
that-
can get a
it-
handle on it.
It's much more complex than that,
Okay.
because that would be, what goes around comes around, and it's far too complex for that. And an afterlife, there are similarities between nirvana for Buddhism and moksha for Hinduism, where you detach from the suffering, the reincarnation in Hinduism, and from Buddhism, you move from being a bodhisattva, a person who has a higher level of awareness and practice in the world, and therefore you're not ready to leave and go to nirvana. And nirvana is freedom from suffering.
And do you have a physical body in nirvana?
That's not spelled out anywhere in any of the texts that I've read. No, it's a spiritual existence.
So they do believe in spiritual, which is something separate from physical.
Yes.
In at least in the after you leave your physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And do the Hindus as well?
Not in the same way we do, and I'm gonna have to call my colleague from Harper to ask her.
Okay, I'll stop now.
No, that's okay. But
I could go on, but I'll stop.
no, there are
Thank you.
points at which it's just very difficult to answer when I'm straddling my own faith and what I know of another. And
I'm just trying to translate into something that I can comprehend, and I can relate to my own relationship to spiritual and to God.
Okay.
I'm trying to frame it with something that's familiar, because the practices I can understand, but the purpose behind the practices I'm having a hard time with.
Okay, let me work on that one, because that question I think is a very important one. And I'm still a dabbler after all of the reading and teaching I've done. And I'm still very interested, because I do take things away from other traditions that are very meaningful to me without ever departing from, I'll use the from the pulpit or in the prayers pastoral phrase.
Yeah, I think that's what Chuck was asking you. How do you incorporate those practices and still remain loyal to your Christian beliefs?
Well, I would submit that being interested in using things from other faith traditions is not being disloyal.
Yeah, I didn't say it was. We just
No.
wanted you to explain it, because often in our tradition, you're either one or you're the other, but you can't be both. So the fact that you are very comfortable with both, I just want to learn more about how that is and how that developed.
I'm going to have to really wrestle with that larger issue, but I understand your question. And I guess I would say that I'm not being self-deprecating when I used to answer students and say I'm a lousy Christian. I most of the people I encountered as a parish pastor, I'm not even sure that I could delineate what a good Christian is. I mean, it's such a vague, wide open term. And I don't like to say that some people are better than another. I just know that following the path of Jesus is something that is incredibly demanding. Incredibly. If I, going back to the translating Allison's work into the eyes, if I see things with the eyes of Jesus, I'm a very different person than me with my human eyes.
And aren't we all?
Yeah, yeah.
Terry, I've got one more question for you to chew on. And maybe by next week, when you're going to be chewing on the things that Nancy mentioned to you. Joy's question a while ago was the difference between a philosophy and a religion. And I'm thinking of the word religion, the etymology of the word, the two Latin words re and legio, to bound back, to bring me back to the divinity. And so is it that's a really interesting question for us to hear your thoughts on next week, because I got to run. But is Hinduism and Buddhism, are they religions or philosophies?
Real short answer. They are both religions for their practitioners. Confucianism is the one where you can really argue philosophy, but it's still very important for a large number of people in China. Okay, anyone else? Thank you. And
Well, I just want to say that you'll have 2 weeks to chew on these questions because we're not meeting next week. It's December 27th. We'll give everybody time off to celebrate the birth of our Lord. It's very enlightening. So you have 2 weeks to figure them all out. And we'll have 2 weeks to wait for the answers. Right.
I'll do my best at it. And thank you very much for listening and for the questions.